Stand on the walls of York in northern England today and you're standing where Roman soldiers kept watch nearly 2,000 years ago. Walk through the Shambles and you're following streets first laid down by Vikings. Touch the stones of the Minster and you're touching a building that took 2.5 centuries to complete. This is a city that has refused to die. Emperors have died within these walls. Kings have ruled England, music from here. Armies have besieged it. Plague has ravaged it. Bombs have fallen on it. And through everything, York has endured. What you're about to see is different from any history documentary you've watched before. Music. Using advanced AI techniques, we've transformed centuries-old engravings and faded photographs into living, breathing scenes. You're not just going to learn about York's past, you're going to see it as it actually was. This is the story of York, 30 minutes, 2,000 years. Let's begin at the beginning. It's 71 AD. The Roman 9th Legion pushes deep into hostile territory, chasing British tribes who refuse to submit to Roman rule. They reach a strategic point where two rivers meet, the Ouse and the Fosse, and there they stop. Not to rest, but to stay, they build a fortress. Timber walls first, then stone. They call it Eboracum. The 9th Legion makes York their home. 5,000 men, battle-hardened veterans who fought across the empire. They're building bathhouses and barracks, temples and administrative buildings. This isn't a temporary camp. This is the beginning of a city. But then something happens that still puzzles historians today. Sometime in the early 120s, the 9th Legion vanishes. 5,000 soldiers, their standards, their records, all gone from history. Where they went, we may never know. The 6th Legion arrives to replace them, and they remain in York for the next 3 centuries. Eboracum isn't just a frontier fort anymore. It's becoming something far more important. In 211 AD, Emperor Septimius Severus arrives in York after campaigning against the Scots. He's old, exhausted, and dying. He draws his last breath in this city at the very edge, music of his empire. His son, Caracalla, stands in York and makes a decision. This place, this northern fortress, becomes the capital of Britannia Inferior. Half of Roman Britain is now governed from York. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Emperor Constantius dies in York in 306 AD. His soldiers immediately proclaim his son, Constantine, as the new emperor. Constantine doesn't just rule, he transforms the Roman Empire. He legalizes Christianity, ending centuries of persecution. He moves the capital to Constantinople and reshapes the entire structure of imperial power. Western civilization pivots on decisions made by a man who begins his reign right here in York, a statue of whom can be found just outside York Minster today. By 314, York has a bishop attending church councils in Arles. Christianity isn't just tolerated, it's becoming the establishment. The city that was born as a military fortress is now a center of faith and imperial power. When Rome finally withdraws from Britain a century later, the greatest empire the world has ever known crumbles. But York doesn't just disappear with it. The Roman walls begin to crumble. Stone is taken for other buildings. The carefully laid streets disappear beneath mud and new construction, but people remain. The Anglo-Saxons don't conquer an abandoned city. They inherit one, transform it, and make it their own. Eboracum becomes Eoforwic. For 2 centuries, York adapts to the post-Roman world. Then on Easter Day in 627, King Edwin of Northumbria, a pagan warrior who spent his life fighting for power, walks into a small wooden church in York and allows himself to be baptized. One man's conversion might not sound like much, but Edwin is a king. When kings convert, kingdoms follow. Christianity spreads across Northumbria like wildfire, music, and York becomes its epicenter. The small wooden church where Edwin is baptized will eventually become the Minster, but that transformation will take centuries. By 735, York's bishop has been elevated to archbishop. York is now on equal footing with Canterbury. England doesn't have one Christian center anymore, it has 2, and York is one of them. And then the city produces a mind that will shape European thought for generations. Alcuin becomes master of the York School in 778. Under his guidance, it becomes one of the most respected centers of learning in Europe. Monks travel from across the continent to study here. When Charlemagne needs someone to lead education across his vast empire, he chooses Alcuin from York. This is York's golden age of learning. While most of Europe struggles in the darkness after Rome's fall, York keeps the lamp of knowledge burning, but across the North Sea, other men are building ships and sharpening weapons. They've heard about the wealth of English monasteries, the gold in the churches, the riches waiting to be taken. They're coming, and nothing will stop them. November 866. The longships come up the Ouse in the pre-dawn darkness. Hundreds of warriors, Danish and Norwegian, the great heathen army that has already torn through eastern England. They surround Eoforwick before the sun rises. The Anglo-Saxon defenders never stand a chance. By nightfall, the Vikings hold the city. They will keep it for nearly 100 years. They rename it Jorvik. And they don't just occupy it, they rebuild it. This isn't a raid, this is colonization. Viking families settle here. Craftsmen set up workshops. Merchants establish trade routes connecting York to Dublin to Scandinavia, to the wider Norse world. Archaeological digs at Coppergate in the 1970s uncover Viking streets so well preserved that leather from their workshops, wood from their buildings, even seeds from their gardens survive 1,000 years underground. Jorvik becomes one of the most important cities in the Viking world. At its height, it may be home to 10,000 people, massive for the time. They mint their own coins here bearing the names of Viking kings most people have never heard of. The city hums with industry. Metalworkers, jewelers, woodcarvers, leatherworkers, all plying their trades in the narrow streets. But Viking rule is unstable, violent. Kings rise and fall. The last one has a name that tells you everything you need to know about Viking culture. Eric Bloodaxe. That's his actual name, earned through brutality. In 954, Eric is music killed in battle and the Viking kingdom of York dies with him. For a brief moment, York is simply English again. The Anglo-Saxons reclaim their city, but that peace lasts exactly 1 century, 1066, the year that changes English history forever. Norwegian Vikings come first, trying to reclaim what their ancestors lost. King Harold Godwinson marches north and meets them at Stamford Bridge just outside York. He crushes them utterly. The Viking Age is over. Harold celebrates in York. He has saved the city, saved the north. Then riders arrive with desperate news. William of Normandy has landed in the south with an army. Harold has to march back immediately. He covers 200 miles in 4 days, reaches Hastings exhausted, and dies there with an arrow in his eye. Or so the legend goes. William wins, and York is about to learn that Norman rule will be the harshest yet. William of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, rides into York music in 1068. He looks at the city that has defied Roman legions and Viking armies, and he gives one order: build me a castle. The foundation of York Castle is laid, and William stations a garrison there to ensure the city remembers who rules England now. The people of York have other ideas. In 1069, they rebel. They ally with a Danish invasion force, storm the castle, and slaughter every Norman inside. For a brief, glorious moment, York is free again. William's response is apocalyptic. He unleashes the harrying of the North, a campaign of systematic destruction that remains one of the darkest chapters in English history. From York to Durham, his soldiers burn every village, every farm, every field. They slaughter livestock, destroy food stores, salt the earth. The chroniclers who witness it can't find words adequate to describe the horror. People starve in their thousands. Some turn to cannibalism. Yorkshire becomes a wasteland. William rebuilds York Castle, and this time there will be no rebellion. The message is clear: defy me and I will turn your world to ash. But life continues. Slowly, painfully, York recovers. Trade resumes. The Minster begins its transformation from timber Anglo-Saxon church to stone Norman cathedral, and York gains something unexpected: a saint. In 1153, Archbishop William returns to York after years of exile. The city turns out to welcome him home. So many people crowd onto Ousebridge to see him that the bridge collapses, hurling hundreds into the river below. And then, the miracle. Not a single person dies. William's tomb in the Minster becomes a pilgrimage destination, drawing visitors from across England. But 1190 brings a horror that stains York's history to this day. England is preparing for the Third Crusade, and anti-Jewish violence erupts across the country. In York, a mob turns on the Jewish community. The Jews seek refuge in Clifford's Tower, the wooden keep of York Castle. For days, the mob besieges them, demanding conversion or death. On the night of March 16th, facing certain massacre, many choose to die by their own hand rather than give the mob the satisfaction. Those who come out hoping for mercy are murdered anyway. Around 150 people die that night. The exact number is lost to history, but the shame remains. York is wealthy now, powerful, connected to royal authority, but it's also capable of terrible cruelty. The 13th century will test the city in different ways. It's the year 1212. King John, probably the worst king England ever has, does something remarkable for York. He grants the city powers of self-governance. York can now run its own affairs, collect its own taxes, administer its own justice. It's essentially an independent city-state within England. This isn't charity, this is business. York has become rich, staggeringly rich from the wool trade. English wool is the finest in Europe, and York is one of the primary centers for processing and exporting it. With wealth comes power, and York is flexing that power. Then comes 1298, and King Edward I, Longshanks, the Hammer of the Scots, moves the entire English government to York. Not just himself, but everything. The treasury, the exchequer, the law courts, the administrative machinery that runs the kingdom. For 6 years, if you want to do business with the English government, you come to York. Why? Edward is obsessed with conquering Scotland. He needs his government close to the war, and York is the perfect forward base. York isn't just important, it's the temporary capital of England. The Scots notice. In 1319, they raid south and come right to York's walls. In the fighting, they kill the city's mayor. This isn't some distant war, this is battle at the gates. Edward III has happier memories of York. In 1328, he marries Philippa of Hainault in York Minster, in a ceremony that brings the flower of European nobility to the city. York is at the peak of its medieval glory, wealthy from trade, favored by kings, powerful in its own right. And then comes something much bleaker in 1349. The Black Death arrives in York like a thief in the night. Plague sweeps through the cramped medieval streets, jumping from house to house, person to person. There's no understanding of how disease spreads, no way to stop it. People die in their homes, in the streets, at their workbenches. The death carts can't keep up. Somewhere between a third and half of York's population dies within months. The economic collapse is immediate. Trade stops, workshops stand empty, fields go untended. The city recovers, but it takes decades, and the 15th century brings new conflicts, political and religious, battles that cut even deeper than plague. Archbishop Richard Scrope stands before his congregation and preaches rebellion. The taxes are too high, the king's rule too corrupt, the people too oppressed. Scrope is one of the most powerful churchmen in England, and he's calling for uprising. King Henry IV responds with ruthless efficiency. He has Scrope arrested, tried, and beheaded. The execution shocks England. Archbishops aren't supposed to be executed. They're supposed to be untouchable. But Henry IV doesn't care about tradition. Scrope's head comes off and his body is buried in York Minster. Almost immediately, people begin to venerate him as a martyr. The medieval world is ending. The age of absolute royal power is beginning. And York is about to be caught up in the bloodiest family conflict in English history. In 1472, after 2.5 centuries of construction, York Minster is finally complete. The Gothic cathedral that began in 1220 is consecrated. Soaring pointed arches, massive stained glass windows, stone vaults reaching toward heaven. It's the largest Gothic cathedral in northern Europe. The building that will define York's skyline for centuries to come is finished, but all the while England has been caught up in a horrible war. Rewind to the year 1455. The country descends into civil war. Not a war against foreign invaders, but something far more vicious, a dynastic struggle between two branches of the same royal family, both descended from King Edward III. They're fighting for the throne of England, and the conflict will become known as the Wars of the Roses. On one side, the House of Lancaster, wearing the red rose as their symbol. On the other, the House of York with the white rose. And York, the city, isn't just caught up in this war, it's at the very heart of it. The white rose flies from these walls. Yorkist armies march from these streets. When a Yorkist sits on the throne, York prospers. When a Lancastrian wins, York suffers. 3 kings from the House of York rule England. Edward IV, who wins the throne through battle. His young son, Edward V, who reigns for just 2 months before disappearing. And Richard III, the most controversial of them all, York's champion, the city's protector. To York, he's a patron, a benefactor, someone who genuinely cares about the North. When he rides through these streets, people cheer. When he grants the city new privileges, they're grateful. Richard is York's king in a way no southern monarch ever was, and then comes August 22nd, 1485, Bosworth Field. Richard III dies in battle, cut down by Henry Tudor's forces. The last Yorkist king falls in the mud of Leicestershire, and with him dies the House of York's claim to the throne. York mourns. The Tudors have won, and for this city, it feels like defeat. The white rose is finished, the red rosy triumphant. A new dynasty begins, and they have no love for the North, no special affection for York. The Tudors will bring their own music kind of warfare, religious warfare that cuts even deeper than political conflict. By 1530, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey serves as Archbishop of York. Wolsey is more than an archbishop. He's the second most powerful man in England, King Henry VIII's right hand, the man who runs the country while music Henry hunts and feasts. But Wolsey makes one fatal mistake. He fails to get Henry his divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Henry wants Anne Boleyn, and when Wolsey can't deliver, he's stripped of everything. He dies in disgrace in 1530, broken and abandoned. 6 years later, music Northern England erupts. The Pilgrimage of Grace, 40,000 men, women, and families marching under the banner of the 5 Months. Wounds of Christ. They're protesting Henry's break with Rome, the dissolution of monasteries, the destruction of the Catholic faith they've known their entire lives. York is at the center of this rebellion. Henry crushes it with characteristic ruthlessness. The leaders are executed, and the dissolution continues. By 1539, York's great monasteries, St. Mary's Abbey, Holy Trinity Priory, places that have stood for centuries, are stripped of everything valuable and left to rot. The religious heart of York is torn out, but the Catholic community doesn't disappear. They go underground, practicing their faith in secret, hiding priests in concealed rooms, risking everything. In 1586, Margaret Clitheroe pays the ultimate price. She's a butcher's wife living in the Shambles, and she's been harboring Catholic priests, men who are being hunted as traitors simply for saying Mass. When she's arrested, she refuses to enter a plea. She knows that if she pleads, her children could be forced to testify, could be tortured for information. So she says nothing. Her punishment is being pressed to death. They lay a door on top of her and pile stones on the door, adding weight slowly, crushing her body over hours. She dies in agony, protecting her children with her silence. Today she's a saint, and her house is a shrine. The Reformation has turned neighbor against neighbor, family against family, but that isn't the end of York's troubles. 1644, England is in civil war again. King versus Parliament, Royalist versus Roundhead. York declares for King Charles I, and Parliament sends an army to bring the city to its knees. 20,000 men besiege York for 11 weeks. Inside the walls, food runs out, people starve, disease spreads. The Royalists try to break the siege at Marston Moor, just outside the city. In one of the largest battles ever fought on English soil, they're annihilated. 4,000 Royalists die in an afternoon. York surrenders. The king will lose his head 5 years later. The age of absolute monarchy ascending, and York is exhausted from centuries of warfare, military, religious, political. The city needs peace, and finally it will get it. The 18th century is calmer, but York still knows how to draw a crowd. April 7th, 1739, Dick Turpin climbs the ladder to the gallows at Knavesmire, York's execution ground. Turpin is a highwayman, a thief, probably a murderer, but in death, he becomes a legend. The story about him riding from London to York in a single night on his horsey black Bess, complete fiction, made up by a novelist decades after Turpin dies. But the legend sticks. What actually happens is less romantic. Turpin is a criminal who gets caught, and York hangs him for it. Thousands turn out to watch him die. Executions are public entertainment in Georgian England. Turpin reportedly faces death with courage, but courage doesn't make a man noble. It just makes him brave. 6 years later, York's gallows are busy again. 22 Jacobite rebels are executed here after Bonnie Prince Charlie's failed attempt to restore a Catholic Stuart to the throne. The 1745 rebellion has come close, terrifyingly close, to succeeding. But it fails, and the executions in York send a clear message about the price of rebellion. But the city is changing. The violence and drama of previous centuries are fading into history. York is becoming fashionable, a place where the Georgian gentry come for horse racing, theater, and social assemblies. The ancient city is discovering a new identity, but before that transformation, the Minster will face fire from within. February 1st, 1829, Jonathan Martin hides in York Minster as evening service ends. He waits in the shadows as the last priests leave, as the doors are locked, as silence settles over the cathedral. Then he emerges with candles, prayer books, and an unshakable belief that God has commanded him to burn the Minster down. He piles cushions and wooden benches beneath the choir stalls and sets them alight. The fire takes hold quickly. By the time anyone notices, flames are consuming the choir roof. The Minster burns through the night. The medieval roof timbers, the carved choir stalls, centuries of craftsmanship, all reduced to ash. Martin is caught, declared insane, and locked away. The Minster is rebuilt, more spectacular than before, but the message is clear. Even in the peaceful 19th century, York's treasures are vulnerable. 1830 brings something new, the Yorkshire Museum, built in Greek Revival style in the ruins of St. Mary's Abbey. For the first time, York is treating its past as something to preserve, study, and celebrate. But 1839 changes everything. The railway arrives in York, and with it comes George Hudson. Hudson isn't born to wealth or power. He's a draper's son who becomes the railway king. He makes York the hub of his railway empire, and the city explodes with growth. Railway workshops employing thousands, new stations, hotels, warehouses. The population surges. Suddenly, London is 5 hours away instead of 2 days. Manchester is accessible. The ancient city that has spent centuries relatively isolated is now connected to the entire country. Tourists, music pour in, middle-class families who can afford a weekend trip to see the medieval walls and the Minster. York has been many things over the centuries: Roman stronghold, Viking capital, royal seat of power. Now it's becoming something new, a tourist destination, a place where people come to experience history rather than make it. The transformation is just beginning. 1938, the York Castle Museum opens its doors, and visitors walk down a recreated Victorian street called Kirkgate. Shops with authentic goods, gas lights, cobblestones. It's an instant sensation. York isn't just preserving history anymore, it's bringing it to life. But unfortunately for York, it cannot escape the mercy of World War II. 29th of April, 1942, the air raid sirens wail across York at 2:30 in the morning. People stumble from their beds, confused. Why would the Germans bomb York? There are no factories here, no military installations worth mentioning. They don't understand. This isn't a military raid. This is cultural warfare. The Germans call them Baedeker raids, named after the German tourist guidebook. Hitler has ordered his Luftwaffe to bomb Britain's most historic cities in revenge for RAF raids on German cultural sites. York, with its medieval streets and ancient Minster, is a perfect target. The bombers come in waves. Incendiary bombs rain down, designed to start fires that will spread through the old timber buildings. The Guildhall, which has stood since the 15th century, burns to the ground. Row after row of medieval houses catch fire. The sky glows orange. The Minster should burn. Incendiaries land on its roof, but volunteer firefighters, ordinary people, climb up there in the middle of an air raid and put out the fires before they can spread. They save it. When morning comes and the all-clear sounds, 92 people are dead, hundreds are homeless, and large parts of medieval York are smoking ruins. But the Minster stands. York rebuilds. And it grows in ways that would have been unimaginable a century before. In 1963, the University of York is founded, bringing thousands of students to a city that has always been about the past. Now it's thinking about the future. A year later, the National Railway Museum opens, celebrating York's Victorian transformation and becoming one of Britain's most visited museums. Then in 1984, the Jorvik Viking Centre opens, using the incredible discoveries from the archaeological digs in 1979 to recreate Viking York. You can walk through reconstructed streets, see animatronic Vikings at work, even smell what 10th century York smelled like. History isn't you just read about anymore. It's something you can experience here in York, but the tragedies aren't done yet. Later that year, in 1984, another fire breaks out in the Minster. Lightning strikes during a storm and the south transept roof is engulfed in flames. Some people claim it's divine judgment. The Church of England has just consecrated a bishop whose theology some find controversial. Others just call it bad luck. Either way, the Minster burns again and York repairs it again, just as it had done after Jonathan Martin's fire 155 years earlier. 2,000 years, 70 generations, one city. This city has witnessed the best and worst of what humans are capable of. Constantine's vision, Viking ingenuity, medieval scholarship, unspeakable violence, unshakable faith, the courage of a butcher's wife, the determination of firefighters saving the Minster while bombs fell around them. If you're from York, this is your heritage. This is what your city has endured and achieved. If you're not from York, you've just learned why this city matters, not just to England, but to the story of Western civilization. Through everything, York has survived, then thrived. History isn't just something that happened, it's something that shaped us, and York has shaped more history than almost any city in Britain. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video and subscribe for more entire histories. Don't forget to comment below the city you'd love to see next, and it might just be featured in the next video. Thank you for watching, and as always, we'll see you in the past.